Hello everyone, how are you all doing today? Good. Great. My name is Jacob Pelletier, and on behalf of the Vermont Humanities, I'd like to welcome you all to our special author visit with Danquah. I'm coming to you from Middlebury Union High School for those who are watching the recording, so thank you all for being here today. Before we begin, I just have to thank a few of our community partners that helped make this visit possible. First, a big thank you to Middlebury College, and especially Professor Susan Birch for helping to coordinate this week of special visits. Also, a big thank you to Middlebury Union High School and all the teachers and staff that really put the work together to make this such a warm welcome for us today. And especially for Middlebury Community Television for making this recording possible to get us out and get these important messages out to across the state. Finally, a thank you to our sponsors of the Vermont Department of Libraries and Institute for Museum and Library Services for sponsoring all of our author visits that we do across the state. So thank you to everyone who made this possible. And finally, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Danquah, a native of Ghana, is a freelance journalist, ghostwriter, public speaker, and actress, a teacher, and an incredible person. I've been very thankful to be able to spend the day with her today. Her groundbreaking memoir, Willow Weep for Me, A Black Woman's Journey Through Depression, was hailed by the Washington Post as a vividly textured flower of a memoir, one of the finest to come along in years. And a number of these copies have been donated to Middlebury Union High School, so be sure to ask your teachers if you'd like a copy to read later. And as a native of Ghana, Ms. Danquah is the editor of 4 anthologies, Becoming American, Personal Essays by First-Generation Immigrant Women, Shaking the Tree, New Fiction and Memoir by Black Women, The Black Body, and Accra Noir, as part of their popular noir series. She currently lives in Southern California, and let's give her a warm welcome for today's event.
To begin this talk, I wanted to begin this talk by first letting you know that I have terrible anxiety, and next, I have a really debilitating stage fright. So that's my disclaimer. Nevertheless, this is part of my professional world. Standing on stages and speaking with people about my writing, which, because I'm a nonfiction writer, often offers the details of some of my most traumatic experiences. Being in this state, Vermont, being here in this town, Middlebury, for the past few days, and more specifically, being here today in this school, has really taken me back in my life and catapulted me onto the threshold of doors I thought I'd closed long ago. I earned my MFA in creative writing and literature at Bennington College here in Vermont. After I received my degree, I turned and said to one of my classmates, not dramatically, but definitely quite seriously, I'm leaving tonight and I will never, ever step foot in Vermont again. That was in 1999. I'd had such a challenging time at the school and in the state. I'd been excited to attend Bennington because of the school's commitment to the arts and because of Vermont's reputation of being uber liberal. Imagine my shock then when I arrived in a place where there were so few Black people I could count them on one hand. I mean, this was the state of Bernie Sanders and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And yet, none of the stores carried any Black hair care products. I felt like I didn't belong. And the faculty at the school was a reflection of the state. White, white, and more white. And don't get me wrong, by grad school, I'd existed in majority white spaces for a significant amount of my youth. I was used to that. But I had chosen Bennington because I'd wanted to study with Lucy Greeley, a brilliant memoirist who was white, but I also, as an immigrant, a Black woman born in Ghana, hoped that there'd be other people who could help me navigate the terrain of those stories that I wanted to share, not only from a literary angle, but from personal knowledge. Another African immigrant, maybe? Okay, I would have settled even for another immigrant of any color, period. It was a time of tremendous isolation for me and self-doubt, a time spent wondering whether what I wanted to write, the stories that I wanted to tell, were even worth being told. 24 years have passed, and I did keep my word. I did not come to Vermont. Until now. And this is my first time back in Vermont. While I was being driven from the airport in Burlington to Middlebury, I stared out the window and was nearly moved to tears by the beauty of this land. I'd forgotten how stunning the scenery is, with the Adirondacks to one side, the Green Mountains to the other, and the trees in between whose leaves show off the most brilliant and vibrant colors. Memories came rushing back to me of times spent in the healing quiet of this nature, of sitting and writing poems with the Green Mountains to my back. I had been so overwhelmed by the negative aspects of my time there that I let it eclipse the positive ones. Then too, there's this town, Middlebury, whose name is just one letter off from the town where I attended boarding school, Middleburg, in Virginia, at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But so much is similar, the color green and the type of font used in the writing of the name, the small town feel. Even the furniture in the Middlebury Inn is virtually identical to that of any of the small inns where I'd stayed in Middleburg. And more so than the similarities of the town, there is you, the students, and your similarity to me. Because all students all over the world, particularly high school students, share one thing in common. Ahead of you is a future, a forever, that you're being asked to define, and you simply have not a clue where or how to even begin. And that can be incredibly overwhelming. Back then, when I was a high school student in Middleburg, I didn't know that being myself was enough, that it was actually more than enough. I thought I had to be someone else, become something else, to be successful, to be liked, to be appreciated. I didn't realize that I was worthy of all the things that I wanted, and that I didn't have to suffer silently or to silence or kill any part of myself off in order to fit in and be accepted. In my adulthood, and I've spoken about this in the classes that I spoke to earlier, in my adulthood I came across a quote by the writer Joseph Campbell that changed my life. It is, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." Let me repeat that. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. It doesn't matter if you're poor, if you're chubby, if you're gay or straight or trans or intersex, if you're Black, Native American, Latinx, Asian, white, or whatever other label society has taught you to place on yourself. You are enough. And if you leave here understanding or caring about nothing else that I have said today, at least remember and understand this. You are meant to be here. You are meant to survive the circumstances of your life. and that survival is your story, and your story matters. I wanted to read an excerpt from a piece of writing, if I can find it. Okay, it's an essay that I wrote. It's called Writing the Wrongs of Identity. For a period of time, after clinical depression became the literary topic du jour, it seemed as if most of the work I read about the illness was written by white Jewish women from Boston who had, at some point in their lives, been treated at McLean. I must admit, I always thought it rather odd that one city could contain so much sadness, and that one hospital could contain so many talented and successful people among its roster of former patients. Nevertheless, I would search for these books. I would purchase each and every one as soon as they were published, take them home, and sit barefoot and cross-legged on my couch with a box of Kleenex at my side while I read about the lives of these people in this city that systematically manufactured great writers and even greater misery. As a reader, what I cherish most about literature is the permission it grants me to escape the confines of my own life. No matter who or what I am, have been, or want to be, I'm able, for the length of a book, to inhabit a new reality, one that the author constructs. My relationship to the literature of depression, however, is somewhat different. It is based not on a desire to lose myself in the pages of a book, but on a relentless need to find and define a very specific part of myself through the book. That part which melancholy stalks like a jealous lover. For many years, the only place in this huge world of words where it appeared as if I was welcome to carry out that search was inside the narratives of these women, these white Jewish women from Boston. Of course, not all the work on depression was written by them. During the period of time to which I'm referring, a number of authors were writing of madness, of disorders, and moods. There were a few books and essays by men and other women, some of whom were not Jewish and did not come from or live anywhere near New England. Regardless of their gender or place of origin, these writers did have one thing in common. They were all white, all of them, which placed me in the peculiar position of having very little choice but to look to these white people for some sense of validation, some basic understanding of who I am as a depressive and ultimately as a person underneath this illness. There are times when I feel like I've known depression longer than I've known myself. It has been with me since the beginning, I think. Long before I learned to spell my name. No, even longer than that. I'm sure that before I could even speak my own name or learn to love the color of my skin, this hollow heartache was following me, patiently awaiting the inevitable crossing of our paths, planning my future unhappiness. I've always been aware that something in my life was not quite right, if not totally wrong. My scales were never balanced. For every 12 joys, I had 25 sorrows, and each sorrow was like a song, a melodious seduction, bringing me closer and closer to this terrible sickness, which has cost me friendships, money, opportunities, time, and more time. So much wasted time. At first, I had a hard time figuring out why there were no glossy magazine articles or literary books about depression by Black people. I've never thought of myself as average, but I've also never thought of myself as an anomaly. Surely there were other Black women suffering from depression, questioning their sanity, searching for an affirmation, if not an answer. Why were they not coming forward or writing about it like their white counterparts? In deciding exactly what it was that I wanted to share in this essay about my experiences with clinical depression, I realized that mental illness and race are topics that cannot be divorced from one another. Not easily. Not for me. You see, the mask of depression is not all that different from the mask of race. So much of clinical depression has to do with identity, with images, with how those of us who suffer from the disease perceive ourselves, and how, based on those oftentimes grossly distorted perceptions, we interact with others. So much of racism has to do with the same. It too barrages its prey with groundless images. It concerns itself more with the fiction of a prescribed identity than with the notion of any true individuality. It too seeks to blur a person's vision of herself and her place in the world. Racism is also an illness, perhaps not in the same way as depression, but an illness nonetheless. To contend with either one is bad enough. To grapple with both at the same time, well, that's enough to drive a person, pardon the expression, crazy. Welcome to my madness. As a Black person struggling with depression, I don't know which I fear more, the identity of illness or the identity of wellness. One might imagine that the identity of wellness would naturally be the most desirable of the two, but that's usually the problem with desire. What you see is not necessarily what you get. The societal images of Black female wellness, as evidenced still in present-day popular culture, have nothing at all to do with being well. Far from it. They have everything to do with the lies of history, a history that invariably has been shaped, created, or informed by the poisonous ideology of racism. In these lies, Black women are strong enough to work 2 jobs while single-handedly raising twice as many children. Black women can cook, they can clean, they can sew, they can type, they can sweep, they can scrub, they can mop, and they can pray. They are rarely romanticized, often over-sexualized. Hookers, whores, Thursday night concubines, and sultry-voiced back-alley blues singers with Venus Hottentot hips. Either that or they are desexualized, just straight-up masculinized, mean-faced, and hardened. Whatever the case, Black women are always doing. They are always servicing everyone's needs except their own. Their doing is what defines their being. And this is supposed to be wellness. Not that the identity of illness is any better. Its only appeal is the allowance for vulnerability. You're able to need others, to invite their assistance, to accept their love. The catch is that you also have to be fragile. Anybody who's ever really been sick knows that the tolerance level for illness is low. Once the get-well roses begin to wilt, everything changes. Compassion and caretaking turn into burdens, and vulnerability becomes weakness. If the illness is something as nebulous as depression, folks begin to treat it like a character flaw. You are lazy, incapable, selfish, self-absorbed. The list is pretty much the same regardless of one's race. But race cannot and should not be disregarded. There is no room in the Black female identity for weakness, laziness, incapability, selfishness, self-absorption, or even depression. If I were to say that reading all the books by those depressed white people did not have a profound impact on my ability to come to terms with my own battle against depression, it would be disingenuous. Each one was like a mirror. Even if the external reflection looked nothing at all like me, what I saw of the internal reality was an accurate representation. The disease was the same. The symptoms were the same. The resulting confusion and hurt were the same. None of that was enough, though. I craved wholeness. I wanted to recognize all of me. Yet no matter how much these authors' confessions assuaged the discomfort I felt within, their stories could only meet the marrow and the bone. They could never move outward and touch the flesh, the blackness that dictated the world in which I existed. What they could and did do was inspire me to write my own story. In writing that story, I began finally to see why voices like mine were all but absent in discussions about depression. By the time my memoir, Willow Weep for Me, was published, I had undergone various methods of treatment for my depression: therapy, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, some of which were ineffective and others of which worked marvelously. I had become unashamed of the illness and unafraid of its stigma. Moreover, I had moved past the tendency to view my life against the blinding background of whiteness, the need to paint it with predetermined images of blackness. Every now and then, I find myself thinking about those white Jewish women from Boston. I find myself wondering about their reaction to my story. Do they read my work and see more than race? Can they enter my world and recognize something of themselves in my reflection? Thank you for your attention.
Okay, now we're going to open up to questions, and I'll walk around with the mic if anyone wants to brave the first one. Yes.
So after publishing your book, how have your friends, family members, and coworkers responded? Do they treat you any differently?
Yes and no. My friends were all, aware that I was writing, and many of them I had, my close friends, many of them I read sections of what I'd written, so there weren't too many surprises there. My family, my mother and I didn't speak for about 3 years, and she just wasn't really interested in acknowledging that what my experiences were. And my father, something really amazing and interesting happened with my father. My father, who really was the one that I thought would be like, yeah, okay, whatever. He was actually the one that called me and said, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, and I am here for you, and I am willing to listen, and I hope you forgive me. So there were surprises that were there, and then everybody else, I just realized, I don't care. It's like, whatever, I appreciate the people who are helped by the book, and people who aren't helped by the book. It's like, okay, maybe it's not for you then, So you can't please everybody.
So you touched on this a a little bit, but you talked about writing about like vulnerable parts of yourself. Is it ever like difficult to publish a book, or like how do you feel about having these really like personal stories just out in the world for people to read?
That's a good question. I'm a nonfiction writer, so most of what I write is personal stories out in the world for everybody to read. But what's interesting is that I'm also a really private person, and so, you know, it's just really, I don't know, there's a balance, I guess. I live a life that doesn't really involve like, hi, I'm an author who wrote this about myself, you know? And then when I go and I speak at universities or I do book signings, that's when really people, you know, talk to me about it. Or every now and then something interesting will happen. Like I was up one night, I couldn't sleep. And I don't know if you guys ever do this, because I don't know if you ever get a hold of your parents' credit card, but I was up one night and I was on Etsy. And I was like, oh, these are cute little earrings, you know. They had like all these earrings of different authors, you know. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna get the Toni Morrison earrings. Oh, I'm gonna get this. So I like bought like 10 pair of earrings from this one little Etsy seller. And whenever you get something, usually from somebody on Etsy, they have a little cute little note, or they'll put their card in and say, thank you so much for your, you know, because they're all like their own little business, you know, so they're trying to sort of get you to be like a regular customer. And so there's this card that comes in with all the earrings, and I open it and it says, Dear Miss Danquah, and which of course she knows my name, and she goes, I'm a big fan of your work. I read your book years ago and it saved my life. I was going to commit suicide and my friend gave me this book, and I was just like, oh, well, maybe I won't think about the earrings. Maybe I'll write her back, you know. So there, every now and then the two sort of collide, and that's really the only time, you know. But I don't really even think of it as sharing, you know, like I don't get up and say, oh, there's this really, really deeply personal thing that I'm going to share. There's a reason why there's always a transcendent topic. There's a reason why I feel like I want to share it. Like I'm writing about menopause right now because there was so much silence. I thought I was dying. You know, I went to different doctors. I thought I was like dying from some awful disease. And then to find out it was like something that every woman's gonna go through. And I was just like, why is nobody talking about this? Like, and so, you know, I'm doing an essay in an anthology that a friend put together after we'd had many conversations about that. So yeah, it's not just getting up and deciding, oh, I want to write about this personal thing.
What made you decide to come to Vermont to like talk about it? Because you hadn't been here in so long, and so I don't know, like what made you decide to do it?
That's such a good question. Okay. They teach Susan Birch, who is a professor at Middlebury. She apparently teaches with my book, and one of her students said, hey, that's my auntie. And so she said, oh, can you get her to maybe visit the class? And it was still during the pandemic. And so I did on Zoom, you know, and it went really well. The students were really interested. And so she said, well, when things kind of normalize and people are back in classrooms, will you come back? And I was like, oh yeah, because I didn't think it would really ever, like, not that things would normalize, but that the invitation would actually come, like the follow-up. And so then I'd get this, invitation to come, and I was like, yeah, I don't know about the Vermont thing. And so she goes, we promise to be very nice to you. And I was like, I don't know. And I said, when? And it was that question too, because if it was like December, I would have said no. It was just not happening for me. But it was, October, and I thought, you know what? This is good. I need to confront that part of my life anyway, And so it was really wonderful packing and seeing that the weather was like really behaving, and I thought, this is a sign I'm supposed to be there, right? So I'm glad I said yes, but that is why I said yes. It was a step by step. It wasn't like someone just called me and said, come to Vermont. I'd have been like, no.
I think I can project. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you for coming. So you're originally from Ghana?
I am originally from Ghana.
Okay, I missed that part. If you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit and how old you were when you came over here. And then I'm also wondering if you have a message for everyone, like what you would say to your younger self that was battling with this, horrible illness that a lot of us have and struggle with, and, kind of it's invisible,
Okay. Ghana, I'll start there. I was born in Ghana, and my parents came when I was 6. And I lived in a house where I was not allowed to speak English. We didn't eat any American food. We didn't have any English spoken in the house. So I had these two very separate worlds, and trying to fit into one world was just, crazy, but then trying to sort of stop the process of assimilation as a child and fit into this other world also became really, a little insane. And it actually, it makes for great literature now, but back then it was just incredibly painful, one of the things that I wrote about in my memoir that I'm writing right now on immigration is I used to get teased a lot by the black kids in my school. And one of my friends, who is this biracial girl that lived upstairs, who's still a very dear friend of mine since 3rd grade, she said, that's because you talk funny. And I was like, oh, okay. And she goes, you don't sound black. And I thought, well, I don't want to sound like not black. I want to sound, because I'm thinking like I'm black. Of course I want to sound black, right? And so I didn't know what that was. We're in 3rd grade, right? And so she was like, okay, say water. And of course, I still had my accent, and I was like, water. And she goes, yeah, see, nobody black says that. Say water. And I was like, water? And so I was like practicing, And so she would say, so next time they come and they're like mean to you, put your hand on your hip and say, yo mama. And I was like, okay. So here I am, I'm like in the bathroom of our apartment, and I'm practicing all this stuff like water, yo mama. And, and so my grandmother, who had come to stay with us, and now remember that Ghana used to be a British colony. So my grandmother, she walks by, and then she opens the door and she goes, this is what you're doing to the Queen's English? And I was just like, I'm sorry. So it was definitely a whole hodgepodge of various experiences. And then in my adulthood, I moved back to Ghana, and I taught at the university, and my daughter went to school there. And so I was there for quite a number of years, and I go back and forth now. And then the other question you had was about what would be my advice.
Yeah, what would you say, like your younger self or a younger, high school student?
I think I started off with that.
Oh, sorry.
No, I talk about the quote that I came across in my adulthood that by Joseph Campbell that says, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." And understanding that I didn't need to change myself, that I could be myself and that I was worthy of that. And also the understanding that, and I'll just read it as, I've written it, you are enough. You are meant to be here. You are meant to survive the circumstances of your life. That survival is your story, and your story matters. That's what I would tell my younger self.
You talk a lot about your experiences, just like throughout your childhood and graduate school, college, which helped you discover who you are and your experiences with depression. When you look back on them, do you wish that they were different, or do you kind of accept them for how they happened?
Oh, I accept them, I welcome them, I'm so glad that they happened because, like I said, I survived, and that became my story, and my story is something that was worthy of being told and being written. And I think everybody's story gives them their direction in life. We pave the road by walking, and that's what you're not told. Well, I don't know. Your teachers are here. I'm not gonna say that's not what you're not told because I don't know what they're telling you, but that's what I was not told in school, because there's always so much, what do you want to do? And there's so much planning, which of course, planning is not a bad thing, but I didn't realize that you could pave a road by walking, and by understanding that, that's a worthwhile life also, Does that make sense?
Even after reading all these books and writing your own book about it, do you still struggle with depression?
Oh yeah. Not as badly as I did, because I now know what it is, and I also know ways to prevent triggers. I know ways to prevent things. I know triggers. All of that. So it's not the same as it was before. But yes, is the short answer.
You talked about how, with your depression, it wasn't, talked about a lot, and that was hard for you. Do you think that, now there's more space in the conversation for mental health and to talk about depression?
That's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Yes and no. And let me begin with the yes. Yes, because everybody talks about oh, I'm going to therapy. Oh, there's this therapy available. Oh, and my mental health, that I'm going to take a mental health day. But I find that it's surface level. It's very, very surface level. And, the example that I've used many times is, let's compare, let's say, a migraine and anxiety, for instance. They're essentially the same type of illness, even though they're very different illnesses. What I mean by the same type is, if we're going to compare them, they come on suddenly, right? Migraines can come on suddenly, anxiety can come on suddenly. They're debilitating. Some people suffer from migraines a couple of times in their life and never again. Some people suffer chronically. Same thing with anxiety. But if we stop and think about how many times somebody has said, oh, I didn't go to school because I had a migraine, versus calling up your teacher and saying, I didn't go to school because I had anxiety, you know. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable saying that, and a lot of, let's say, employers wouldn't receive that. They'd be like, what do you mean you had anxiety so you can't come to work, you know? And that's because a lot of people don't generally understand what anxiety is as a whole disorder, because we don't educate ourselves on that. Not in the same way that we educate ourselves on heart disease, MS, Alzheimer's, diabetes, you know, illnesses like that. We don't understand the different kinds of depression, the fact that there's a low grade of depression called dysthymia, the fact that, you know, what major depressive episode is, what are the symptoms of it, you know, what's the progression of it. These are things that we don't really stop and educate ourselves about, and we should. We should have the same working knowledge of here up as we do here down, you see, because we're one unified body.
Do you feel like you've gotten a lot of criticism on how you experienced your depression and how you sort of dealt with that?
On how I experienced it? No, because I think that everybody's experience of illness is unique, so I don't really know how somebody could criticize me. Maybe they have and I just rejected it, I don't know, but I think everybody's experience of it is different. I think I've gotten some criticisms about how I've written about it, you know, so yeah. But again, everybody's experience of it is different, and so I can't sort of write about other people's experience of it, and critiques about books they can be funny, especially memoir, because sometimes in the hands of the wrong reviewer, they critique the life and not the writing, you know, and the structure and so on and so forth, when in fact, when you're critiquing a book, you're meant to be critiquing the structure of the book and the development of the story and the narrative and, you know, the devices used and all of that. So, yeah.
When did you start writing?
I have been a writer for as long as I remember. I've been writing for as long as I remember, you know. An uncle of mine has a poem that I wrote when I was 6. And so that is as early as I can actually factually pinpoint. But I've never not written. So. I didn't think I was going to be a writer though, because I've always written, but I didn't think of it as a profession that I was going to pursue. So, and those are different.
In our generation, like technology and like social media is very present. I'm curious to what you think, because of like all the technology in our generation, how that changes the context of depression and what that means, like today.
I'm gonna answer that, but I just have to say that in our generation,
Or like,
it kind of, no, I understand what you're saying, but it made me, my daughter, I'll share with you something. My daughter said to me, she's in her 30s, her early 30s, she said to me, she goes, hey Mom, you know the difference between 2023 and 1983 is the same difference between 1983 and 1943. And I suddenly was like, because like I was alive in 1983, I was in high school, and if you told me I had anything in common with somebody from 1943, I'd have been like, what? And I said, no, no, no. And then she turns and she goes, the math ain't mathin'. So every time somebody says, oh, my generation, I'm like, 1943 is what comes into my head. So to specifically answer your question, I think that for your generation, it is a real tricky thing. It's a real slippery slope because I think we're already seeing that with all of the increase in mental health issues and suicides among young people, and that's because isolation breeds a whole bunch of stuff, including self-medication, including severe depression, and we think, because we're fooled into thinking we have community because we're like, you know, texting people and talking to people online, but we're still alone, essentially, and a lot of people are doing it like from a room alone, and you know, we're human beings, we need human touch, we need the sun, we need so many things that we need, and we need community. And so it's you know, we're really depriving ourselves right now because of technology, particularly young people, of having a lot of those things, of going out, just going outside and saying, I'm gonna, you know, just go out and be out with my friends. You know, particularly people who live in places like this, because you've got like great neighborhoods where you can go and you can hang out and do whatever, you know, play basketball or, you know, do whatever. And so there isn't that same sort of like outdoor activity, and it makes a huge difference. And it makes a huge difference in ways that I could, you know, really break down. Number one is going outside and just, you know, walking outside barefoot on your front lawn is, you know, your feet get a lot of minerals from the ground. It's called grounding or earthing, and that's really healing because your feet are the most sensitive part of your body, and so you absorb all those minerals. Number two, being outside, you get vitamin D, and vitamin D is so critical to many things, including mood and mood disorders. And you know, one of the things I talk about in terms of prevention is if you know, one of the things that I do is I get up in the morning, and within 30 minutes of waking up, I go outside. You know, the sun, sunlight against your cornea, and please don't look directly in the sun, anybody, but sunlight against your cornea, it resets your circadian rhythm. So, you know, serotonin plays a huge part in depression and in other mood disorders. So being able to have all of those things, and then also, we understand this in children, like babies, but then we somehow forget when we get older that there is such a thing as deprivation of touch, and it affects your central nervous system. You know, so we do need to actually touch each other. That's part of our biology. So, you know, I think that this is where it gets a little tricky. You know, like when I go out with my daughter and we go to the grocery store and she's like, oh, we could just like check out ourselves. And I was like, I am not a checker-outer. I'm gonna wait in line and let the person who they're paying to check out do that. And so she goes, oh, I get why you do this now, because I like having the little conversations at the Starbucks. I mean, those things are very human interactions, and they feed us more than you realize, you know. You've got a little bit of community here because you're in school every day. But when your world sort of changes, which you saw it change during the pandemic, isolation becomes really intense, you know, and you start to feel the effects of not having all of these little things that you take for granted on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that answers your question.
How has your profession as a writer influenced the way you see the world?
Huh. That's a really good question. I don't really see the world as a story, per se. I mean, I just try to exist in the world, but I don't know, wait a minute, I don't think that's entirely true, you know. I think I do sometimes see stories, and I think sometimes when I'm living certain experiences, I understand that it's the closure of a story that never had closure. And so whether or not I'll write it, I don't know, but you know what I mean? I still I still see that. A few years ago, I had something happen to me that I knew from the second that it started happening that if I lived through it, I would write about it. And I was coming back from Las Vegas with a friend of mine, and at the time I used to drive a Range Rover, a white Range Rover, and we were driving back. I had just stopped for gas at the Nevada-California line, and apparently there had been an accident on the freeway, and so my friend, who's a white gentleman, he says, "Oh, let's just go the back way." And I said, I don't get off the freeway. I'm sorry. And he goes, "You'll be fine." And I was like, oh, okay, because I'm with you, I'll go, right? So part of it is a gender thing, part of it is a race thing, because when you get off the freeway and you're a woman alone, you don't know where you're going to be, because on the freeway it's like you're passing through all these cities, and when you get off the road you don't know what part of town you're in, you don't know, so anyway, I decided to get off the freeway, and we were driving, and then we made a right turn, and it was the most beautiful Joshua tree forest I had ever seen in my life. It was incredible. It was like Joshua trees to the left, Joshua trees to the right, as far as the eye could see, right? And at the start of the road, it said, no gas, 50 miles, but I had just gotten gas. So I was like, we're good. So I thought, man, this is great. And I'm not an especially religious person, but I was like, talk about God's magnificence. It's like one of those moments where you're like at the ocean, or you're like, you're somewhere and you feel like that little speck. So overwhelming. And then I stopped. It was like a 2-lane road. And I stopped and I said, I want to take a photo. And my friend goes, yeah, but don't stay here, because it's such a long stretch of road with no lights that people drag race. So you don't want someone to come barreling through here and hit you. And I go, oh, okay. So I pull over, and he gets out of the car to go take a picture. Because I am lazy and trifling, I do not. I grab my camera from my phone from like the phone mount, and then I roll down my window. That's going to be my picture, right? And so I roll down my window, and then I go, what's that smoke? And then he goes, huh? Because he was still kind of coming around the back. And I said, what's that smoke? And he goes, oh crap. He goes, get out of the car, get out of the car. And he's like screaming at me. And I had one of those, the steps, the retractable step. So I opened the door, and there was like a tray of flames, and the minute it hit the air, it went whoosh, and it kind of like burned me like all right here, singed, I should say, more, not like actual 3rd degree or anything, it singed. And then I was like, whoa. And then he says, open the door, but don't get out immediately, it'll go back down. So I was like, okay. So I open the door and it does the whoosh again, and then it goes down a little bit, and then I like leapt over the flames, and he and I are like just running down this like desolate street in the middle of nowhere. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And I'm just sort of sitting there watching my car burn, and I thought, if I live through this, I gotta write about this, because this is like insane. This is so like, how does this happen? I think, oh, this is the most beautiful thing on earth. Let me burn it down. And in fact, I did start a wildfire. And it was in protected land. It was the Joshua, it was the Mojave National Preserve. And it burned for days. And while we were there, they had to send for air support because it was burning so fast and so hard. And there were like 4 aircraft, and I learned more about fires than I ever wanted to know. And it was just really intense. It was really intense. But there was that, because I did kind of think as we were like running, like, I'm gonna write about this is crazy, So when the park rangers were there, like, helping us, there was one point at which I was just sort of in the experience going, oh my God, and I was just like devastated, and I was crying because they were really sweet. They put us in one car, but they didn't turn the radio off, and the guy was like really sweet, and he's like, oh, it's not your fault, honey, don't worry, it's gonna be okay. And then he'd go to the other car and go, we gotta get air support, the turtles are gonna burn, the critical turtle, and I was like, oh, the turtles are burning. So, I went from that to like, then going, so why did you join? Why did you join the park rangers? What trained you for that? Blah, blah. Like, and I'm taking notes on my phone and going like, okay, and like talking to, the fire people and all of that, and trying to figure out what aircraft is the one that like has the bucket, which one is the retardant, and so I'm like taking notes and all of that, and then they took us to the park ranger office, and they were very sweet, and they said, do you want some food? Do you want some tea? And I said, oh, I'm so hungry, I would love some food. And they gave me like a military meal, like in a bag, and I just sort of put it in my bag because I thought, I don't want to eat it and throw it away. I want to write about this. I'm going to put it in my bag. I've never seen this. So there is that part of me that interacts with the world like that, So I can't completely say that doesn't exist. But it's not turned on all the time, So.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
During the time that you were reading a lot of those books about depression, did you notice any differences between authors who wrote about it experientially rather than like observationally? Like, for example, like a therapist who wrote about it having seen how their clients experienced it rather than someone who was actually experiencing it themselves?
I didn't read a lot of books by therapists. That's actually not what I was looking for. I was really looking to find out from firsthand account. I've now, since then, read books by therapists, but that's not what I was looking for. I was really looking to sort of have a mirror and to say, what is this person feeling? How are they experiencing this? And like I said, each person's experience of it was very different. The closest I would say that I came to the therapist version of it would be Kay Redfield Jamieson, who is a brilliant writer, and she wrote a book called An Unquiet Mind, and she also wrote a book on the artistic temperament, madness and the artistic temperament. And so she has a little bit of that removed, but then she also suffers from bipolar, which I suffer from unipolar depression, but she suffers from bipolar depression. And so I would say that's the closest during that time that I came to it.
Great, well, thank you, everyone. Let's give